Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be taking a walk through New Zealand's dark history. We'll be talking about the most notorious asylum, lunatic asylum, that we had. We'll take a look at the tragedies that the patients endured, and we'll look at the consequences and its legacy. It might get a bit heavy, so I've got my cup of tea, and let's jump right into it. It was established in 1884, guys. It was the largest and grandest building that we had in New Zealand. The grounds were magnificent. They were huge. And it had this Gothic architecture. It was proper Victorian. It had an observation tower that stood proud and tall, where the staff could look upon the grounds and see if someone would try to escape. Seacliff was a place where the agenda of well-being was pushed. This was a place for people to recover and feel better, was what the public thought. But in reality, this was a prison with no release date. It was a place to be feared, and people were scared if they were even threatened to go or just walking past the grounds. At the time, anybody could be sent to Seacliff because there was an idea that the people that did not fit within society standards should be locked away. You might think, was it just people with disabilities? No. It was homeless people, drunk people. It was people that were thought to be feeble-minded, homosexuals, women that were hysterical, pretty much anybody that didn't fit the criteria. So what happened in Seacliff? Why were people so scared? Patients were merely experimented on. Even though medicine at the time was barbaric, the level of abuse that people endured here was no joke. People would get lobotomies. They would have sterilization done to them without their consent. They would do electroconvulsive therapy to people. They would put these plugs and they would put a thing on your mouth and electroshock your brain, basically, to cure you. And something that is so horrific, they would circumcise women and unsex them, which I can imagine must have been horrifying. Seacliff had a famous patient. Her name was Janet Frame. She was incorrectly diagnosed as schizophrenic, and she was staying at Seacliff, let's put it. She spent many years of her life there. And she depicted in her autobiography some of the horrors that she witnessed. She witnessed people, patients, being beaten up for bad wetting. She witnessed people having to endure verbal abuse, physical abuse, and her own experience, how they treated her. They would humiliate people, and they would threaten them with a medical treatment if they did not obey an order. And there could be anything. To humiliate them even more, to strip the last bits of humanity that they might have, they would say, go to the bathroom where there are no doors and do your business in front of everybody, whilst they abused them. Janet actually depicted that the patients there would often plan their escape route. They were always in search for a way out. Actually, she missed out on getting a lobotomy herself because she won an award for the publishing of her book. That was the only reason. Unfortunately, most people were not that lucky. So you might be thinking, who was in charge? Well, to answer that question, in 1889, a man called Sir Frederick Truby King, but most commonly known, Truby King, was the management at Seacliff. And he wanted to move. He had good intentions, I guess, for the time. He wanted to move Seacliff into a more positive environment. He wanted to make sure people had good nutrition, fresh air, and he actually turned Seacliff into a working farm by giving patients jobs, by giving them, how can I put it, maybe a sense of purpose. He would assign these roles as gender-based. The men worked outside while the women worked inside. And keep in mind that even though he was trying to move into a positive direction, all of these other things were still happening. People were still getting medical treatments. They were still being abused. They were still being mistreated. And what people don't, or maybe perhaps they want to forget about, is the fact that Truby King was basically a big fan of eugenics. Basically what that means is selective breeding for humans, to make sure that the undesirable traits would get breeded out. He had very interesting ideals. However, he was the founder of the Peckett Society. And for those that are not from New Zealand, the Peckett Society is a support network for parents. But at that time, it was for mothers. And his motto was, help mothers save babies. Which sounds great, right? It sounds amazing, okay? Let's help mothers save babies. But underneath all of that, underneath was the reality that he was a firm believer in selective breeding and creating this perfect race, this perfect society. That he wanted to make sure he would lecture mothers on what they needed to do to raise their babies. And if something didn't seem right, or if they weren't completely up to standard, he would have been happy to send them to Seacliff. This was extremely damaging to society because he was quite highly regarded. And at that time, his legacy, or because of his legacy, more than 10,000 people were separated from their families and taken into mental institutions. Just think for a moment. More than 10,000 people. These people were mistreated in these institutions. They were not there to recover or be happy. It was not about healing. And some of the stories would shock you. But let's jump back into Seacliff. In December 1942, a tragedy happened at Seacliff. One of their extensions caught on fire. It was a 2-story wooden building, and it was locked in. It had barred windows, and no one was doing checks. This building caught on fire, and there were 39 women in there. By the time that an attendant noticed the fire and the fire brigade came, it was too late. Only 2 women survived that tragedy. 37 women died of suffocation that night. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, it is said that Seacliff is haunted, especially where Ward 5 once stood. So what is the aftermath, you might be asking? Well, despite the fact that this was a terrible place to be feared and where patients suffered horrific things, it was still looked to be an upgrade from older methods of treatment. And the reason is because of the working farm situation, because people were given a purpose, because they had fresh air and good nutrition. It was actually closed in 1973, and a different institution was made to house patients and to continue treatment. What remains of Seacliff are just ruins. Ruins of where this magnificent building once stood. What happened to Plunkett? Well, eventually Plunkett moved away from Truby King's ideals, and it's become an amazing support system for parents throughout New Zealand. And for fire protocols, they have improved immensely since the fire of 1942. Better safety procedures have been put in place. You might be asking, what about the patient records? Don't the families of these people want to know? Unfortunately, I do not have good news here. These records have been sealed for 100 years, so relatives are still struggling to find answers. So that's it from me today, guys. I hope you found this interesting. It is important for us to understand our past in order for us to be better in our future, for us to understand and treat people better. Without understanding our past, we will never grow. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to my channel. I will see you guys next time. Bye.